"Don't touch that." The voice cut through the noise on Mount Street before anyone could place where it came from. Desmond Pierce's hand was already closed around the handle of a battered guitar case, his fingers white at the knuckles, his grey LIPA lanyard swinging against his chest as he turned. Behind him, 16-year-old Maya Whitfield sat frozen on the low stone wall outside the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts, her father's guitar still pressed against her chest, one hand muting the strings mid-chord, the tape across its neck catching the grey October light. 40 feet away, a black car had pulled in against the curb, its door still swinging open. "I said don't touch that," the man repeated, and this time people turned to look at him properly. Silver hair, navy jacket. A face that half the street recognized before their brains had finished processing it. Pierce's hand didn't move. "Sir, I'm afraid this young woman was asked to leave the premises this morning, and she's currently— I heard what you said to her." Paul McCartney's voice stayed level, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. He wasn't looking at Pierce anymore. He was looking at the guitar. For a moment, no one moved. A LIPA student near the gate lowered her phone an inch, then raised it again, slower this time, like she didn't trust what she was filming. An older woman by the railing pressed a hand flat against her chest. Pierce's grip on the case loosened, just slightly, his eyes flicking between the guitar and the man standing 6 feet away from him. And something in his expression shifted from authority to confusion, to the faint dawning shape of fear. Maya hadn't said a word. She didn't fully understand yet what was happening. Only that the man who had stopped on the morning she'd been told, for the second time in one day, that she didn't belong here, was staring at the one thing in the world that had ever truly belonged to her father. But that moment didn't start there. To understand why Paul McCartney recognized a guitar he hadn't laid eyes on in 21 years, a guitar a grown man was currently trying to pull out of a teenage girl's hands on a Liverpool pavement, you have to go back to a flat above a chip shop in Toxteth, and a man named Marcus Whitfield, who once played 4 bars on a recording nobody ever credited him for. If you've ever watched someone you love get written out of their own story, stay with this one. Subscribe now, because what happens on this street in the next 10 minutes has been 21 years in the making. The freeze frame held a second longer than it should have. Pierce's hand was still on the case. Paul's eyes hadn't moved from the sound hole of the guitar, where a thin strip of electrical tape wound around the neck like a bandage that had been reapplied so many times it had become part of the instrument itself. Around them, the crowd that had been drifting past Mount Street on their way to lectures and coffee runs had stopped entirely. That particular stillness that happens when people sense a moment is about to become a story, and nobody wants to be the one who looks away first. A second LIPA staff member, a younger man who'd followed Pierce out moments earlier, slowed his steps and stopped a few feet back, radio still in his hand, suddenly very aware that whatever he'd been called out here to help with had just become something else entirely. "Sir, I don't think you understand the situation," Pierce said, and his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. "This girl was already—" "I understand it fine," Paul said. He still hadn't let go of the case. "Better than you think." Maya's chin lifted slightly. She looked from the guitar to the man holding it, then to Pierce, then back again, trying to assemble a version of the morning that made any sense at all. 6 hours ago, this man had told her, in 4 flat sentences, that her father's guitar wasn't good enough to be played inside this building. Now, a stranger she'd seen on record sleeves her whole life was standing on the pavement outside it, refusing to let it go. To understand why, you have to go back further than this morning, further than October. Back to a narrow flat above a chip shop on Windsor Street in Toxteth, where a man named Marcus Whitfield used to sit on the edge of a single bed with this same guitar across his knees and tell his daughter, only once, only ever once, about an afternoon in 1997 that he never told anyone else about because he didn't think anyone would believe him. Liverpool in the late 90s was a city still living inside its own echo. Every pub had a Beatles photograph on the wall. Every corner shop sold postcards of Penny Lane. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, a 22-year-old session guitarist named Marcus Whitfield got a phone call that would change nothing about his life and everything about his daughters 21 years later. For a moment, nobody on Mount Street knew any of this yet, but they were about to. Marcus Whitfield was 22 in the spring of 1997, working 3 days a week stacking shelves at a bargain booze on Smithdown Road and spending every spare evening in a damp rehearsal room above a laundrette, playing guitar for anyone who'd pay him £15 a session. He wasn't famous, he never would be. But he was good, the kind of good that other musicians noticed even when nobody else did. In April of that year, a producer he barely knew called him in last minute to cover for a guitarist who'd missed a session for a charity recording linked to a project McCartney's people were quietly involved in. Marcus turned up with his only guitar, played 4 bars nobody had rehearsed, and got it right on the first take. Afterward, a man in a denim jacket leaned over, signed the inside of the sound hole with a felt pen, so it wouldn't be seen unless you reached in with a torch, and said, "Thanks for saving the session. Keep playing." Marcus never saw him again, and never told anyone the man's name, because he genuinely thought no one would believe him. He kept that guitar for the rest of his life. Marcus married Denise in 2001. Maya was born in 2002, her brother Caleb in 2007. The flat above the chip shop on Windsor Street was small and always smelled faintly of vinegar, but Marcus filled it with music. Sunday afternoons spent teaching Maya chords on that same guitar, the tape already wound around the neck by then, the crack along the lower bout, something he refused to have repaired because he said, "It's earned that." On a Tuesday morning in March 2014, Marcus collapsed at the bus stop on his way to a session he never made. He was 41. He left behind Denise, Maya, Caleb, and the guitar. By October 2018, Maya had been carrying that same guitar to school, to busking pitches, and finally, that morning, to a scholarship audition at LIPA, the one place her father had always said understood musicians like him. She walked in at 8:30 a.m. with the guitar on her back and her father's old set list folded in her pocket. 4 minutes later, Desmond Pierce handed back her application form with a single line written across it in red ink. Instrument unsuitable for performance standard. She didn't argue. She'd learned a long time ago that arguing with men holding clipboards never changed anything. If you've ever been told you weren't good enough by someone who never once asked your story, stay with this. Subscribe now, because in 9 minutes, the man who signed the inside of that guitar is about to walk straight past Desmond Pierce and stop in front of Maya instead. After the rejection, Maya didn't go home. She sat on the low stone wall outside LIPA's main entrance, the application form still folded in her jacket pocket, the red ink bleeding faintly through the paper. She told herself she'd wait until the embarrassment passed before catching the bus back to Toxteth, back to Denise, back to telling Caleb that the audition had gone fine, because that's what she always said. Instead, almost without deciding to, she pulled the guitar onto her lap. She didn't play for the students walking past, or for the small group that began to slow near the gate. She played because her hands needed something to do, and because Let It Be was the song her father always said told the truth twice, once in the words, once underneath them. Her fingers found the opening chords out of habit, and for the first time that day, something in her chest loosened slightly. That was when Pierce came back outside. He hadn't expected to see her still there. To him, it looked like defiance, a rejected applicant busking directly outside the building in view of arriving guests, on the one day LIPA had visitors coming for its anniversary. He radioed for backup before he'd even reached her, and by the time the second staff member appeared, Pierce was already reaching for the case, telling her loudly enough for the gathering crowd to hear that she was representing the Institute poorly and needed to leave immediately. Maya's first instinct was to stop, to apologize, pack up, disappear the way she'd disappeared 100 times before. That voice was already in her head, the one that said girls like her didn't get rescued, they got moved along, and the sooner she accepted that, the easier everything became. But she thought about her father picking up sessions nobody credited him for, never once playing like it didn't matter. So instead of stopping, she closed her eyes and played louder. Into the confrontation, not around it. That was the exact moment the black car pulled in at the curb, 40 feet away. The door opened. A man in a navy jacket stepped out, and before his foot had fully landed on the pavement, his eyes had already found the guitar in Maya's hands. Specifically, the sound hole. Specifically the place where, 21 years earlier, he'd reached in with a felt pen and left 4 words he'd long since forgotten he'd written. Pierce's hand closed around the case. Paul McCartney started walking, not toward Maya, toward him. Paul reached the wall in 6 steps, and the first thing he did wasn't speak to Maya. He reached out and took the guitar from Pierce's grip, mid-sentence, with a gentleness that somehow made the gesture land harder than if he'd shouted. "Sir, I'm afraid this young woman was already removed from the premises this morning. Her instrument doesn't meet." "Her instrument," Paul said, not raising his voice, "is the only thing on these grounds today that's earned the right to be here." Pierce stopped talking. Paul turned the guitar over slowly, the way someone handles something they've been looking for without knowing it. He ran his thumb along the crack in the lower bout, the same one Marcus had refused to have repaired years ago. Then he tilted it toward the light and looked into the sound hole. The crowd had grown without anyone noticing. Students drifting out of the building, a few of the anniversary guests filtering onto the pavement, phones rising in slow motion all around. Nobody understood yet what they were watching. They only understood that a Beatle had just gone completely still over a piece of damaged wood, and that stillness, on a man who'd spent 60 years being looked at, meant something. "What's your dad's name?" he asked quietly, looking at Maya for the first time. The question knocked the breath out of her. She'd expected almost anything else. An apology, a photo request, nothing at all. Not this. "Marcus," she said. "Marcus Whitfield." Paul didn't respond right away. He just looked at her. Really looked. The way her father used to look at her when he was about to say something important. And for the first time since stepping out of the car, something shifted behind his eyes. Not surprise. Something that had been waiting 21 years to be surprised. Pierce, sensing the moment slipping entirely out of his hands, tried one more time. "Sir, with respect, this doesn't change the assessment of the instrument, doesn't it?" Paul said. He wasn't asking. He reached into his jacket, pulled out the small moleskin notebook he'd carried since the 60s, and instead of writing anything, he simply held it for a moment, and then turned back to the guitar, fingers finding the edge of the sound hole. For a moment, no one moved. 60 phones, then more, all pointed at the same place. If you believe the people who told you no don't get to have the final word, stay close. Subscribe now, because Desmond Pierce is about to find that out in front of every single one of them. Paul reached 2 fingers inside the sound hole and felt along the wood until he found it. A small, faded inscription in felt pen, the kind of thing that survives 2 decades only because nobody ever knew to look for it. He didn't pull the guitar away from the crowd. He turned it slightly so they could see and read it aloud, quietly at first, then loud enough to carry across Mount Street. "To Marcus, thanks for saving the session. Keep playing." He looked up. "I wrote that in April of 1997. A lad came in last minute, played 4 bars nobody had rehearsed, and got it right on the first take. Best session musician I worked with that year, and I never even got his surname until just now." The crowd had gone completely silent, the way silence happens when 200 people realize they're standing inside a story rather than watching one. "This morning," Paul continued, turning toward Pierce, "you told his daughter this guitar wasn't good enough to be played inside that building." Pierce opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "You might want to have another look at her application," Paul said. He wasn't shouting. He didn't need to. A murmur moved through the crowd, low and unmistakable. Someone near the back said, clearly enough for everyone to hear, "That's not right at all." And Pierce, under the weight of 60 raised phones, took 1 step back, then another, before turning and walking quickly back through the doors without another word. Paul didn't watch him go. He turned back to Maya, sat down beside her on the low wall, close enough that she could feel the warmth of another person, the way her father used to sit beside her on the floor when she was learning her first chords, and held the guitar out to her. "Play it again," he said. "Properly, this time." Maya's hands were shaking, but they found the chords anyway. Paul leaned in slightly and began to hum the harmony beneath her, low and unhurried, the same melody her father had once played for a stranger in a denim jacket 21 years earlier, in a rehearsal room above a laundrette neither of them had ever returned to. For 90 seconds, on a grey Tuesday morning, nearly 200 strangers stood in absolute silence on Mount Street and listened to a girl who'd been told she didn't belong there play the song her father always said told the truth twice, with the man who'd written half of it. When the last note ended, the street erupted. When the noise settled, Paul reached into his jacket again, tore a page from the moleskin, wrote something in under 30 seconds, folded it once, and pressed it into Maya's hand. "Read it later," he said. "Not now." Then his car door closed, and he was gone, absorbed into the gathered crowd of staff and guests, now flooding the entrance for the anniversary event neither Maya nor Pierce would ever fully explain to each other again. That evening, in the flat on Windsor Street, Maya unfolded the note at the kitchen table while Denise stood behind her and Caleb watched from the doorway. Beneath a phone number, in handwriting she recognized instantly from 100 album sleeves, it read, "The 1997 session your dad played on was never paid out properly. 21 years sitting in a union account with his name spelled wrong. My office has already started fixing that. He earned it. So did you." Denise sat down slowly, pressed both hands flat against the table, and didn't speak for a long moment. It wasn't the money. It was 21 years of her husband being a footnote in his own life, finally being corrected. 6 weeks later, Maya walked back through LIPA's doors, a different admissions panel, a full scholarship, the guitar still on her back, tape and all. She asked them not to repair the crack. "It's earned that," she told them, and didn't explain further. She plays "Let It Be" at the end of every showcase. On her practice room wall, beside a torn page from a moleskin notebook, hangs a photograph of her father, 22 years old, smiling, holding the same guitar. If you believe credit always finds its way home, even 21 years late, share this with someone still waiting to be seen. Subscribe for more.